Every year we ask ourselves the same thing. Will this year be better than the last? And we always end up being wrong, but the other thing we always ask ourselves is, will there be hardware announced at a developer-focused keynote? And, of course, all the hardware we're excited for pertains to Apple's silicon and that transition continuing because Apple's not quite done yet. Although a fairly reliable leaker at Apple's last event said that the M1 chip is done, and that only leaves the Mac Pro, which they'll save for another day. When that day will be, let's begin. So Mark Gurman has proven to be a fairly reputable source in the leak community, but obviously not everything is perfect, which is why I feel a little bit weird swimming up the current, even though I see a lot of people suspecting that the Mac Pro will be announced at WWDC, and a lot of people hoping for colorful new MacBooks. I'm still really expecting that this will be a software-focused event, leaving all of us wanting more, and it may be because of, post-traumatic event disappointment, PTED, considering the fact we thought there would be hardware at the last two developer conferences, and we didn't get any hardware at either of them. So that still has me convinced that ever since Apple has switched to the virtual online event format, they want to have more events throughout the year that can be more focused and dedicated to the subjects at hand. Yes, if Apple wants to introduce a whole new workout on the Apple Fitness Plus subscription, they can decide to host a 1-hour-long keynote and be perfectly fine with it, hyping us up and getting us excited thinking Apple Glass is going to be announced at a very special and rare event for a full week, and then we find out it's nothing. So yes, Apple knows there's a lot in store, and they know there's a lot of hype, but the fact that the invite itself actually shows the Swift logo, not even the Apple logo, makes me feel like this is probably going to be more developer and software focused. Whereas what Mark Gurman is telling us is that Apple has several new Macs ready to launch in the next couple months, and his sources are telling him to expect 2 new Macs basically near the middle of the year, or at least early in the second half. It's typically not likely for Apple to introduce new Macs alongside the new iPhones because Apple doesn't want their products competing in stage time. So September, that's when you get new iPhones, new Apple Watches, and probably a budget iPad because that's not terribly exciting anyway. It's just like, hey guys, guess what? We have the same design and we slapped an even newer CPU in there. Everyone goes, all right, is it laminated? No, it's not laminated. Okay, I'm done. I don't care, whatever. So September is usually when you're not going to get that many Mac updates, so Gurman's saying to expect it early in the second half, plus saying expect it in the middle, and that WWDC would be the perfect time. He's claiming that one of these Macs that are launching in the middle of the year is likely to be the new MacBook Air. This new MacBook Air redesign has been talked about for a while now, which is colorful options to choose from, so it kind of resembles the 24-inch iMac colorful lineup, as well as introducing the new M2 chip, which, keep in mind, the current MacBook Air was still a chassis that was optimized for Intel, and Apple just kind of repackaged the M1 chip on the inside. Apple really hasn't had too much of a chance to redesign the MacBook Air from the ground up, optimized for Apple Silicon in the ARM architecture, which is why all these rumors are suggesting that the new Air would be thinner and even lighter, and it will get a noticeable design upgrade along with MagSafe and hopefully USB-C ports on both sides. I would really appreciate that, but yeah, overall something that just looks fairly different. And of course, a lot of people are all suspecting that considering the last cheese grater Mac Pro came out at WWDC in 2019, couple that with the fact that Ross Young says a 27-inch mini LED display is going to launch around June, and Apple's already started production of it. There's a ton of people out there convinced that the new Mac Pro will be at least unveiled in June, but not necessarily deliver until later in the year. So don't get me wrong, that sounds exciting, and I would love it if in the next couple months, Apple was going to have a huge event where they unveil all the new software features between iOS, macOS, watchOS, and then whatever the crap is running on iPads these days, and simultaneously at that same event unveil a brand new MacBook Air, also unveil the brand new M2 chip in a new architecture, simultaneously unveil this crazy new silicon for the Mac Pro. Yeah, this sounds like a packed event. It sounds exciting, and it sounds fun, and that's why I don't think it'll happen. Apple doesn't want to put too many eggs in one basket, and I do think the media's attention would all flock to the hardware, and therefore less attention would be given to the software, which is what Apple has wanted for the past couple events, at least for the developer-focused ones. So I think my brain is subconsciously in self-defense mode. Like, it's been disappointed by too many Apple events now that it's just kind of reflecting any kind of positive news, but I don't want to hesitate telling you guys what the reliable sources are claiming is going to happen, so you don't have to agree with what I think. I could very well be wrong, but at least what Gurman is saying is to expect potentially 2 new Macs at the next event, and considering the rest of the lineup has kind of already been touched in some way, shape, or form, you know, we just got the Mac Studio, the MacBook Pros aren't that old yet, so I don't think they're even going to get upgraded this year, and couple that with, at the last event, Apple said that the M1 Ultra would be the last chip in the M1 family. So if that ends up being true, it means not to expect another M1 equipped Mac, which means the only way forward for the MacBook Air would be the M2 chip. And I'm actually pretty convinced that they're not going to use any type of M silicon terminology with the Mac Pro, because the more I think about it, the Mac Pro in Apple's history is so rarely upgraded. You know, we went from cheese grater, and then like 5 years went by, and then they did the trash can Mac Pro, and then another 5-6 years go by and they do a cheese grater again. So because Apple is not seemingly interested in updating the Mac Pro annually or even every other year, it doesn't really make sense to give it a M1 Extreme terminology, or even call it M1 Ultra Duo or something like that, because fairly likely whatever the Mac Pro we get later this year is, it's probably not going to be upgraded next year or the year after that. It might be another 4 or 5 years before they touch it again. And because the Mac Pro has probably been, you know, elevated to this extra new dimension of powerful silicon, and it's running on the ARM architecture, but simultaneously is going to be able to draw so much more power and not have to worry so much about efficiency like all the other Macs do. You know, Apple's going to have the most vague chart you can imagine, where the bar is just achieving these absurd performance units like we've never seen before. So they want to probably brand it something entirely new, and this is what we speculated on the last Tailosive Tech podcast. They may just end up branding it like X1, because if the Mac Pro only gets upgraded every 4 or 5 years, in between those years there's going to be an M2 chip and then an M3 chip. So does Apple want the Mac Pro to still be rocking M1 Ultra Duo or M1 Extreme when other Macs at the same time are still rocking M2, M2 Max, or M3, M3 Pro? That's just going to be confusing if it's associated with the same branding, so they may call it something overly simple like the Apple Pro chip, and that will only get upgraded every couple of years. But because it's essentially going to be 4 M1 Maxes stitched together, yeah, I don't expect any M2 or M3 chip to surpass its performance anytime soon. So don't worry about a future MacBook Air beating out the performance of the current Mac Pro, because I don't think it'll happen. But in the future, then we could get the X2 chip in another couple of years, and that can be built on the same architecture of the M3 or M4 chip, while not confusing the branding of the Mac Pro too much. So that's just some theoretical scenarios. I know that basically every tech community has fallen into despair with everyone guessing what they're going to call the next Mac Pro chip, but I'm sorry, it's fun. It's fun when we don't know what Apple's going to do, and there's so many stupid ways it could go, and that's what I enjoy the most about this channel, is just kind of speculating on what makes sense and what doesn't. Do you guys think we're gonna get 2 Macs at a developer-focused event? One for everyday consumers, one for basically 5 people, which are all the major YouTubers planning on buying the new Mac Pro that'll likely be, you know, $10,000 plus? Or do you agree with me that at this event it probably doesn't make too much sense to launch those, and Apple's probably gonna save it for an October or November event later in the year? Again, not what we want to happen, but just sounds more believable. All that good stuff. Let me know what you're thinking down in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you all in the next one.